I'd like to ask a fundamental question today. The question is, what is God doing? What is his purpose specifically with us? We lost Cilla Black, didn't we, earlier last year. Priscilla White, as her real name was. You might remember that she had one of many famous songs, but it was "What's It All About, Alfie?" You remember that one? So what is it all about, Alfie? It's interesting that when we think about Jesus, we usually think of his birth, his life, his death, his resurrection, his ascension. Although it surprises me how many times people forget that. But that is the sine qua non. Without that, nothing. All the other, it's just an event. It is the ascension that makes all of the previous activity relevant and valuable. And it's, as I say, I'm surprised so often when people speak of these things, they forget that bit. They know the death, resurrection, and that's it. Well, no, it's not. Without that ascension, we do not have a saviour. We're saved by his life, remember. We're not saved by his death. We're saved by his life. But Jesus came to this earth to teach us many things, not just to provide us salvation for us. He also came to introduce us to the Father. Part of his work was to reveal the Father. Notice over in Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11 and verse 27. Matthew 11:27, he says, "All things have been delivered to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and he to whom the Son wills to reveal him." Now, I don't know that there is anyone that the Son doesn't will to reveal the Father, to whom the Son wills to reveal the Father. But without that revelation of the Son about the Father, we will not know him. It is part of the work that Jesus came to accomplish. In fact, if you drop back to chapter 6 of Matthew, when he gives us an outline of prayer, you can pray this, there's no problem with it. If it becomes vain repetition, then there's a problem with it. But it is more an outline of prayer rather than a specific prayer. When Jesus prays the prayer that we have recorded for us in John 17, he doesn't use this outline. He has a different purpose in that particular prayer. But he gives us an outline of prayer, and it's interesting how he begins this outline. He begins with, "Our Father." Our Father. Now, he had revealed to the disciples something about the Father, so they were able to understand what he was saying. But it's interesting, isn't it, that he doesn't begin, "My Father," or instruct us to begin, "Jesus' Father," but "Our Father." He is our Father, my Father, your Father. And when Paul addresses the situation of God and that Father aspect of him, he uses an interesting phrase. Let's go over to Ephesians chapter 3. Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 14. Notice what Paul, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, reveals to us. Ephesians 3 and verse 14 to begin with. Paul says, "For this reason I bow my knee to the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ." So he recognizes that Jesus is the Son of the Father, from whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named. The whole family, whether it's of the spiritual realm, the spirit realm, actually, in heaven, in the heavens, or the temporal realm here on earth. We are all named after the Father. And so by that, he's telling us that we're all God's children. Even at this stage here, we're all God's children. All who have ever been, are, and whoever will be, are children of God. The whole family is named after him. But how can we become part of God's family? We are creatures. We were created. God was not. We needed a beginning. He has no beginning. So how can we become part of that kind of family? Well, we can't in that sense. We can't become like God, although there was a time when we used to think we would be. But you consider that. That's an impossibility. How can we become, we who needed to be created, someone who didn't need to be created? A contradiction, isn't it? We can't become something that we are incapable of being. So there is another method by which we become members of the family of God. Notice in Romans chapter 8. It's a method that to us today might seem a kind of a second option, not a primary cause. And I suppose in a sense that is true, but not to the extent that today we think about this. In Romans 8 and verse 14, we read this. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. Now this is obviously speaking of sons of God in a more focused way than what we read in Ephesians. In Ephesians, Paul, the same author of this letter, tells us that we are all in God's family. We're all named after him. So what he's saying here has a more specific meaning than that general one that we find in Ephesians. He's speaking here of those who are spirit-led sons of God, who have taken a step further. And notice what this leads to. He says, for you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, which is where the family of God was, subject to fear. In fact, if you read Hebrews chapter 2, you'll realize that the fear that's brought upon humanity is from the devil, who holds us in fear and in often a sense of guilt is the tool of the devil, a control mechanism of the devil. But we're not subject to that anymore. But you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. So this relationship that we enjoy is by means of adoption, not natural birth. And it says in verse 16, the Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. So whereas we were children of God but didn't know it, which is the condition of most of the world today, for us, this spirit of adoption reveals to us. We know and understand that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs. Heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. So we are brought into a oneness with Jesus. We are joint heirs. We share with him everything that has been granted to him. Let's think about this word adoption. It meant a lot more at the time that Paul wrote this than it does today. When you were adopted into a family, you really did become part of that family. Now, obviously, you were not a birth child of the family. That's the same impossibility of us becoming members of the family of God like God is. You cannot do that. any more than you can become a birth child of someone of whom you're not a birth child. But in those days, they were regarded as such. They shared all the benefits and privileges of a natural birth. Now, at the festival in Bridlington this year, a friend of mine was our guest speaker, a man I was in college with too many moons ago to remember, actually. A man called Robert Millman, or Bob Millman as we knew him and know him. And he and his wife, Gail, believed that they were not able to have children. And so they adopted a daughter. And as sometimes happens in these cases, not long after the adoption, they actually had 2 children of their own, both girls. So we now have a family of 3, 1 by adoption and 2 by natural birth. And as the kids got a little bit older, and of course the adopted child knew that she was adopted, they didn't keep that from her, there would be little fractures occur, little, to-dos would occur. And one of the natural girls might say to the adopted, well, you're not really part of the family. You're adopted. To which the young lady had the wit to remark, you are here by some accident of birth. I am here by choice. What an interesting thought, isn't it? You ever thought about adoption in that way? Children who are adopted are chosen. Children who are naturally born, they're not chosen. You don't even know what sex you're going to get at conception. And I know these days you can have x-rays and things and find out. But it's a lottery, isn't it? A childbirth, let's face it, is a lottery. You do not know what is going to be the result of this union. But that's not true with adoption, is it? Handpicked, chosen. So sometimes today we might think adoption is a sort of a second-rate affair. And in some respects, I suppose it has to be regarded like that. But not all the way. And with us, we are chosen, individually chosen to become part of the family of God. And when Paul considers this, when John, the Apostle John considers this, he's overwhelmed by the understanding that we are children of God. Just listen to what he says here in 1 John chapter 3. Now, I'll just share something with you. I know this goes out much more abroad than just this group here. It's my personal view that 1 John is actually the last letter of John, not the first. I think they are laid out 1, 2, 3 because of the length. You find a similar sort of a thing with Paul's writings. They are ordered according to length. They're not chronologically ordered that way, except when you get them together, they do follow. So 1 Corinthians is followed by 2 Corinthians, probably because of length anyway, but you get the point. And I believe that these 3 letters of John are laid out for us in the canon due to length. But I think this is the last letter that was written. If you read chapter 5 of John, which we won't do today, but maybe you'd like to when you go home, and think about it as the last words that God leaves us with. Don't think Revelation is the last book to be revealed. It isn't. John's writings obviously have understood all that he saw in the book of Revelation. But when you read 1 John chapter 5, think about it with the idea that these are the words God is leaving us with. And I think you might see where my feelings are that 1 John is the last book. And if it is, look what he says here in chapter 3. Verse 1 of chapter 3. Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Therefore the world does not know us because it did not know him. It doesn't recognize us as children of God any more than it recognized Jesus as a child of God. But now, beloved, we are children of God. Verse 2, look how powerful that is. We are children of God. And it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he, that is Jesus, is revealed, we shall be like him. For we will see him as he is. And everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself just as he is pure. I mean, even here you can see that this is a rounding up of the whole story. John is being inspired to leave us with these thoughts, these confidences, that now we are the children of God. When Paul considered this back in Romans chapter 8, Romans 8 and verse 29, he says this, For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. So we are all being recreated from within to be like Jesus. I don't mean by that, and I don't think Paul means by that we're all going to look alike. You know, we're all going to be yellow pencils. I mean, how boring would that be? And if that is the case, why do we not look all alike now? I think this is speaking of an image in the same way that Adam was created in the image of God. God doesn't look like anything, and so to think that God looks like Adam is a complete mistake. The image is things we will look at in a moment, as a matter of fact. And I think it's true here that we're being formed in this image of his Son when it comes to things like his virtues and his qualities and his character, not his personal appearance. But we are being predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Many brethren. How many? We could spend a long time talking about that. And we might not all agree. Not that it matters. We are not the ones who determine it. God is the one who determines how many is many. But Jesus, though, is the one who sanctifies us and makes this adoption possible. We find our relationship to God not one-on-one in the strictest sense. Now, we don't have to go through any other human agency like ancient Israel had to. There is no priesthood in that sense hovering between us and God, but there is nonetheless a high priest, and that is Jesus. And it is through him that we find our relationship with God, not independent of him. Now, actually, Audrey and I were watching something. What was it? This week. And I don't need to tell you who it was. If you saw it, you know who it is. If not, it doesn't matter. But it's a famous television presenter who you would all know and recognize, who has become a Christian. And he is upset that the three great Abrahamic faiths, Islam, well, we can put them in order, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Okay, those are the three Abrahamic faiths. He's upset that they can't get on. That he thinks, well, it's all the same thing, really. Oh, really? So Islam and Judaism believe that the connection with God is through Jesus, do they? I don't think so. But there is no other avenue. There is only one name under heaven. There's only one name, and it isn't Muhammad. Right? And it isn't Moses. There's one name under heaven whereby men may be saved. And that name is Jesus. He is the door, if you like the expression. He uses it himself. He is the gate. He is the only avenue that leads to the Father. There is no other route. And it's very important that, and I believe we do, but it's very important that that is cemented clearly in our minds. There aren't options. You know, when you go on Google Maps from A to B, it might give you 3 or 4 different options. Well, there aren't any options when it comes to being able to be introduced to, become a part of the family of God. There's only one. In Hebrews chapter 2, the author here makes it quite clear about this relationship. Verse 11 of Hebrews 2. It says, for both he who sanctifies. Now who is that? Who is it that enables us to be holy, to be set aside for a holy purpose? That's Jesus, isn't it? He who sanctifies, and those who are being sanctified. Now who's that? Well, hopefully you and me. So he who sanctifies and we who are being sanctified are all of one. Not 3. 1. Right? There's no room here for anything other than Jesus and us. For which reason, because we are one, even though he by natural birth, we by adoption, he's not ashamed to call us brothers, saying, I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the congregation I will sing praise to you. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, here am I and the children whom God has given me. Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil. So we are released from slavery to sin. We have been enlightened. We know now what sin is, and we've been given the power to resist, to say no to ungodliness, as Paul explains in Titus 2:11. We can say no to ungodliness. And this oneness of this family leads ultimately to what we love to read over in Revelation 21. I had the responsibility and the privilege, I think, to perform the funeral of Rosemary Heavey recently in Virginia, in County Cavan. And at the end of that funeral homily, I quoted this. This is the good news. This is the wonderful vision that we have at the end of all of these things. Verse 1 of Revelation 21. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Also there was no more sea. And then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. No more death. You see how appropriate this is at the end of a funeral service. No more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, no more pain, for the former things have passed away. And then he who sat on the throne said to me, Behold, I make all things new. That's interesting, isn't it? I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. and I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things. And remember what we just read. These are the renewed all things. He shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. Now, there's no sexism here. At this stage, there is no gender difference anyway. But we are all to be part of this family of God. We are all to be the children of God. Why? Oh, I love to keep asking that question. Why? What's it all about, Alfie? What is actually God doing? What is his purpose in all of this? Well, to get some hints, because that's really all we can get. God hasn't revealed all of this to us. If he had, you'd already know it. But to get some hints of this, we have to go back right to the very beginning, to Genesis chapter 1. Excuse me. And verse 27. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27. Where we read, "So God created man in his own image," mankind, as you'll see, not the male, but mankind. "In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.'" Now, God said that he made them in his own image. But God doesn't look like anything. That's why Israel were forbidden to have any statues of God. What are you going to imagine? What does nothing look like? What does shapelessness, depth, substantialness look like when it doesn't exist like that? When God doesn't have any substance. He's not composed of anything. So they were forbidden for having this. So when we talk about being made in God's image, it's not shape. When God speaks to us, he does condescend to us, and he speaks to us often as if he had a hand and an arm and an eye and things of this nature. But in fact, he doesn't. And the image that we bear of God is in some way immediately defined, right there. Be fruitful and multiply. Is God going to do that? Is he multiplying something? Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion. Is this part of the image of God? Well, I think it is. God is overall in charge. These worlds that we see out there and this world here are all his. Now this one's been kidnapped for a while. Nonetheless, it's all God's. And this earth was put under the dominion of Adam and Eve and their progeny, their multiplication as they were commanded to do. This earth is ours. God has given us it. Sadly, we haven't dealt with it all that well, and we are now beginning to reap the results of that misuse and mismanagement, perhaps, if indeed global warming is causing all of this. But we are wrecking the earth. We are not caring for it as they were told to do with the garden, to look after it, to keep it. We've not been doing that in a very good way with this earth. But nonetheless, we find here part of this image that was given to Adam, which reflects God's image, this dominion, this ability to rule these things. So is that it? Revelation 21, Is this what we're looking at here? Just the earth? Well, as time moves on, and I think we have to understand that the book of Genesis is the book, as indeed it's titled, of beginnings. It's not the book of endings. That there is a development that occurs after Genesis, all the way through to the end, of course. There are things that we have learned today that Adam and Eve could never have known. And during that process, King David comes along, who God deals with in a great way, and he writes some beautiful psalms, praising God for various and many things. Let's have a look at Psalm 8. Psalm 8 and verse 29. Psalm 8. I'm sure it's not verse 29. It is in fact verse 3. Psalm 8 verse 3. I think about what David is doing here. He is in the Middle East. There is no street lights. Well, there are no street lights. There's no ambient light to speak of at all. And he's probably reclining on the roof of his home, and he's just looking up to the heavens. Now, you and I have never, probably, I shouldn't say specifically, but you and I probably have never seen what David saw. We have probably never been in an area where there is so little ambient light that the sky becomes magical, fantastic. Now, there are places on earth where you can still do that, but Craigavon isn't one of them. We can go to the Andes and places like that, and you will see the sweep of the Milky Way in a way that you'll never see from here. But David probably saw that as he was reclining on his roof, just gazing. And what does he say? Verse 3, he said, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your hands, the moon and the stars." So we are looking at the universe here, aren't we? The moon and the stars which you have ordained. He says, I ask myself, what is man that you're mindful of him? And the Son of Man that you visit him? For you have made him, and it probably should read, for a little while lower than the angels. You've crowned him with glory and honour. You have made him to have dominion over the works of your hands. Which works are they? Are we now talking about the fish in the sea and the birds in the air and the creepy crawly things on the earth? I don't think that's in David's mind. What's in David's mind right now? When I consider your heavens. That's what he's saying. That you have given him dominion over the works of your hands. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers. So we've moved on a bit, haven't we? From dominion that was given to Adam and Eve, that would be over the earth, to a time that will come, obviously it's not now, but a time will come when we will have dominion over the heavens, where the stars and the galaxies are. That's what God has in mind for us. You have made him to have dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet. And then he comes back to the state as it is right now. All sheep and oxen, beasts of the field, birds of the air, fish of the sea that pass through the paths of the seas. So, although this big picture is what's in David's mind, it resolves to what he's been given to have dominion over today. And that today is today as well. We have dominion over our earth. The author of the book of Hebrews, in chapter 2, quotes that parable. I'd like us to read what he says. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 5. The author here, the whole main thrust, there are leitmotifs in the book of Hebrews, but the main thrust of the book of Hebrews is to show the preeminence of Jesus. Okay, I'll just stop there. It's over everything, but just the preeminence of Jesus. And in this early part, he starts by showing the preeminence of Jesus over the angels. In verse 5 of chapter 2, he said, For he has not put the world to come of which we speak in subjection to angels. Now what did we just read though? He has put it in subjection to us. Isn't that what David saw, understood, it was inspired to write? One testified in a certain place, and this is the psalm, saying, What is man that you're mindful of him, or the son of man that you take care of him? You made him, and as I said, it should really read, for a little while lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honour, and set him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. That's the quote of the psalm. The author then goes on and says, For in that he put all things under him, he left nothing that is not put under him. Nothing. And from the few verses earlier, we see that that must also include the spirit realm, the angelic realm. You have left nothing that has not been put under him. But we see Jesus. He says, but now we do not yet see all things put under him. Well, that's true. Even now we don't see all things. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honour, that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for everyone. So what began in the revealed plan of God as being dominion over the earth has now been expanded manyfold, so that we now have a promise of dominion over everything. The entire creation, including the spirit creation, including angels. The whole thing has been put under man. And we could stop there. I mean, that's sort of climactic, isn't it? That our future and the purpose for our calling and the answer to what's it all about, Alfie, is that we are going to inherit and have dominion over the entire universe. But I can't help asking that question. Why? Why? And I think we get a few hints. I don't think God reveals all of that to us. It isn't necessary for us to know. I think we've got more than is necessary for us to know already laid out. But there are one or two hints. So let's enter into the realm of a little bit of speculation, if you don't mind. I think speculation sometimes can be exciting. It can open our minds a little bit, broaden our minds. So with that caveat that this is somewhat speculative, let's have a look at a couple of verses. Isaiah 51 and verse 15. But I am the Lord your God, who divided the sea, whose waves roared. The Lord of hosts is his name. And I have put my words in your mouth. I have covered you with the shadow of my hand. There is that protection, you see, no matter what was going to happen, because the whole plan was attacked from the beginning, wasn't it? The work of the devil is right there, even in the Garden of Eden, or he probably wasn't in the Garden of Eden, but on the outskirts of it. But God's hand has covered all of this. God's purpose is going to be secure. Why have I covered you? Why have I made sure this is all going to work out? That I may plant the heavens, lay the foundations of the earth, and say to Zion, you are my people. That I may plant the heavens. The word can be rendered established, but I don't think that's what's meant here. I think this is that there is a great purpose for these heavens. They are going to be renewed. Everything's going to be made new. New heavens, new earth. Why? Well, because it's in a mess, isn't it? I mean, we have fouled this earth of ours atrociously. It's going to be cleansed. Peter talks about it being cauterized. That's the Greek word, cauterized, burned off. All the mess that man has made of the outside of this earth is going to be cleansed with fire, renewed. We look up in the heavens and we see these nebula, these gaseous clouds, and we say, oh, isn't that beautiful? No, it's not. It's horrible. It's a wreckage. It's the result of things blowing up. You know that probably every day, it's estimated by those who look for these things, a supernova occurs. That is a star exploding. Is that beautiful? That sounds to me like wreckage. It's going to be cleaned up. It's going to be renewed. It is going to be beautiful. And it's ours. And we're going to go out there and plant the heavens. Why would we want to do that? So look at Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1. And verse 7. Ephesians 1 and verse 7. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, according to the riches of his grace, which he made to abound towards us in all wisdom and prudence, having made known to us the mystery of his will, according to his good pleasure, which he purposed in himself, that in the dispensation of the fullness of the times, when it comes to the end result of this situation we find ourselves in, he might gather together in one all things in Christ, both which are in heaven, and that's where the universe is, it's in the second heaven, and which are on earth. And it's all going to be brought together in one, in Christ. But why? What's it going to be used for? Why does God feel he has to renew it? Now, I know it's deteriorating. I suppose it's possible that there may be many renewals of it. Or it's also possible, I suppose, that God could sustain it in a renewed state. But it's still begging the question, why, isn't it? And I think the answer has to come from an understanding of why this whole thing is happening. What is the motivation behind all of this? Well, I think we understand that there is, amongst the Trinity, a bond of love, that they are bound together by love. It's what keeps the whole thing vibrant. But we're speaking of God here. We're speaking of love that can know no bounds, because God is boundless. He is infinite. And this love also is infinite. And that requires, doesn't it, that it has the ability to increase, to continue to increase. That in a sense, God is so much love that it can't be contained. It has to be shared. There's a Greek word that describes an aspect of God, that's the word kinesis. And it means that whatever comes in flows back out. That's why God, and God alone, can be worshipped, can be adored, can be revered, can be praised, because God is never going to suffer from any of that. It's always going to be poured back out. Unlike the devil who wanted it all for himself, God asks us, requires, and his Spirit motivates us to provide this so that it can feed back constantly. And God's love is like that. It isn't something that can be kept closed up. It has to be allowed to expand. And it's begun with us. God's love towards us is the beginning. We are the genesis of this whole plan. But we're not the end. We're only the beginning. And is it that these worlds, of which there are countless, and we throw numbers at it, but we're still only throwing numbers at the bits we can see. We can't be throwing numbers at the bits we can't see. Are they countless? Are they endless? Will they be populated with the children of God? It's a thought, isn't it? That this expansion, this planting of the heavens, is the eternal process of the expansion of God's love out and out and out forever. We have a little clue that that might be the case. If we go back to Isaiah, this time to chapter 9. Now, as I said, that's a bit of speculation. Those of you who know me know that I like to do that a little bit, to be a bit expansive in my thinking and indeed in my preaching. I don't think it's all whimsical. I don't think it's all off the wall. I think it is based very much in my understanding of God. Let's put it that way. But notice here, Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 6. This couple of verses here that are enigmatic, to say the least. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called, and it probably should read, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father. I did say it was a bit enigmatic, didn't I? We have a son who's described as the Everlasting Father. Now, you know, we could pursue this a little bit, couldn't we? Actually. The church is described as what? The bride. The bride. And what happens usually when a bride is married to a husband? Children? It's a fairly common result, isn't it? No, I don't know, you know, just realise we're just into a little bit of expansion of the mind a bit here. But notice this, verse 7. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. Now notice that doesn't say that his government will be forever. It doesn't say that, does it? It says the increase. The increase will be without end. It will continue to increase and increase and increase and increase ad infinitum. It will never stop increasing. Now there's a thought. Increasing over what? You don't govern planets, do you? Well, maybe you do, but I suspect that what we're talking about here is a family. The government of a family. God's family. that will forever and forever increase. Just a thought. But a good thought. God's love is so enormous that there will never be too much of it, or too many people to be loved. That's just not possible. You can never ever limit that, because the moment you do, you limit God, who is not limitable. God's love is so great, I believe, it cannot be contained. It has to expand. I believe it will be into the new heavens, and it will be forever. Carried there initially by us, and then by his other children, forever and ever and ever.